Hello everyone, welcome to this session on international assignments and expatriates. Now some of you may be or have been expatriate workers yourselves or thinking ahead about taking on international assignments. We're seeing a range of different types of global worker in today's world, and this is changing. But much of the research has focused on senior level people within organisations and on their expatriate experience. So we will be focusing mostly on that. Let's begin by thinking about different types of international work and international worker. So expatriates, I said on the introductory slide, are the group that we're focusing more on, and that's where much of the research has been conducted, particularly amongst high status expatriates. So we can see that expatriates fall into these different kind of status groups. So the high level leaders and managers within big organisations. So some companies such as the kind of BP, Shell, the oil industry, big engineering firms, Colgate, Palmolive, Philips, have a history of expecting people in their senior leadership roles to have spent some time abroad working for subsidiaries, different parts of the organisation, and gaining that global experience. We also get expatriates more at the mid-management level, so more mid-status we might suggest, and in some cases low-status expatriates. Now, expatriation itself has a variety of meanings, and we can say that expatriates come in many different forms. But it's the terms being used to mean somebody who has left their country of birth or their country of residence, permanent residence, voluntarily to work abroad. So they're engaging in legally paid work. They are physically relocating, and this is on a temporary, an assigned kind of basis. Now, expatriates come in different forms. We often, when we're talking about these high status expatriates, we're talking about people who are assigned expatriates. But we also see people who are self-initiated expatriates, people who may decide to apply and achieve a job role abroad, and they may apply for that job role because they see it as very useful for their own personal career development, perhaps for personal reasons, and they want to experience living in a different country for a while. And quite often those people are those who are more at that mid-status. So the characteristics for expatriation are moving into legally paid work on a temporary basis and actually physically relocating for usually a defined period of time. Migrant workers, we know that many people are migrating around the world and have done for centuries. Migrants fall into the skilled and unskilled categories. Again, this is a voluntary relocation, and people moving usually for legally paid work, more often on a more permanent basis. Now we know that there are many difficult situations around the world in countries, and some people who may feel forced to migrate because of the situation in their home country, and they may have a much longer term kind of aim that they will go home if the situation improves. But this is a more of a permanent move than people who fall into the expatriate category. These are the people who HR departments perhaps mostly encounter in relation to work permits and visa issues. And we certainly find that migrants, particularly the more unskilled migrants, are very often working not for these big corporations, the multinationals, but in smaller businesses, private kind of small family businesses sometimes, where there is a lack of qualified HR support for them, and they're almost hidden within the kind of statistics, and lack that support within their work role. So migrants can be highly skilled and employed by big corporations and get quite a lot of support, or be very much on the other end of things. And we're seeing now also a growth in what McNulty and Brewster call this other category, which is where people are taking on much shorter term assignments abroad. Some of that is being driven by companies themselves, because many multinationals are looking to reduce the costs of international assignments. So the people who fall into this very high status category usually expect to be very well rewarded, and their salaries are quite often much higher than if they move to a subsidiary in a different country. They're often much more highly remunerated than the people working locally within that country are. So there is a drive to reduce these kind of costs of these international assignments by many big corporations as well. So greater use of short-term assignments, just international business travel or commuting. So perhaps where people might move from one part of Europe to another and travel home at weekends, for instance. So going on maybe a Monday to Friday basis. Now, the RES Forum is a body that conducts a substantial amount of research into all aspects of global mobility and international assignments. And this is their annual report from 2014, looking at why workers are sent abroad by companies. So what are the main objectives for international assignments, was a question asked of different organisations. And over 95% sort of suggested that they were sending workers abroad to address an immediate business need. In about 2/3 of cases, this was to provide employees to complete some sort of short-term project. And in 63% of cases, it was around supporting some kind of change, basically, an organisational transformation or some kind of restructure. So some key kind of business issues. The other aspect of international assignments is very much related to talent management or career development. And we can see that 63% suggested that they used international assignments or sent workers abroad to develop their senior leaders, their future senior leaders. So they were looking at people moving from that mid-level to senior leader level, and they were using these kind of work assignments to facilitate the development of their leader skills. Just over half were 52% said that they also used these kind of international assignments to develop leaders moving from the kind of more entry level up to mid-level. So we can see that this is something that is part of career development, and I guess leadership development is perhaps one of the key areas of career development that organisations are quite focused on in today's world. Whereas once upon a time there was much more of an internal labour market amongst many big corporations, and a lot more investment perhaps in career development. We're seeing a lot of that that spend and that attention addressed at developing future leaders. So it's not surprising that we're seeing these kind of international assignments used for that purpose. Some cases it was to provide actual country and business unit leaders, so that would still be perhaps to address an immediate business need, but more specifically to actually put somebody in place to run a country or to run a particular business unit. And a smaller number of kind of reasons, according to organisations, were actually just responding to employees' own requests to move abroad, perhaps for go somewhere that employee would like to live and experience for some time, maybe to follow a partner who's been relocated, whatever those personal reasons might be. Now, the RES Forum, you can find that at this link here, and you can look at their 2021 reports and a lot of the information that they've produced there. So that might be quite a useful source of information if you're particularly interested in this area. Now, one thing to note with regards to international assignments, expatriate workers, is who actually gets assigned by organisations. So if we're talking about assigned expatriates, who is it, what type of employee gets sent on these types of assignments? And what we can see is that there are ethnic and gender differences, and those align with the status of these assigned expatriates. So high status expatriates sent on these, well reimbursed international assignments tend to be dominated by white men, from what Henrik et al. Call the weird countries. And by that we mean Western, educated, industrialised, rich, democratic type countries. So it's white men from those countries who really, take on most of the high status assignments. And other data suggests that less than 25% of all assigned expatriates are actually women. So some of the agencies that are involved in supporting and collecting data around global mobility suggest that's the figure, even though other research shows that there's really very little difference, that 41% of women who have families and children are keen to develop a global career and take on these international assignments, and about 40% of men are. So there's really no great difference, the research is saying, between women and men who are keen to take on these types of assignments. But it does definitely seem that women are less likely to be assigned, and certainly men from different ethnic backgrounds, as we might say. Now we tend to see people at that mid-status level, so some of the kind of more engineers, technical, mid-status expatriates. We see a higher number of non-white males taking on those particular roles. But those very high status senior leader type roles, we know that it's white men that lead a lot of these big companies, and that's who we're seeing being sent on those kind of more high status assignments. Now, I said earlier that we're seeing a growth in the other category if we think about international work and international types of worker, and we're seeing what we might call new types. Some people call these new types of expat. So extended business travellers or shorter term assignees who are travelling quite frequently from their home country. We're seeing a growth in what we might call serial expats as well, where people finish one international assignment, maybe for reasons that there isn't suitable work back in their at the home country and the headquarters, take on another international assignments and are kind of expanding their portfolio experience and skills by moving from one international assignment to another. So often these kind of shorter term assignments are about providing direction. They're upskilling managers and employees in those more local subsidiaries. We've got a growth in cross-border commuters or people who are global nomads. And we know with the coronavirus pandemic and more people working digitally from home, we're also seeing opportunities for people to live in different parts of the world and still connect with their workplace as well, and travel perhaps more frequently to indulge their personal desire for travel and experience. Now, some of these shorter term assignees are creating particular challenges, employment law challenges for their employers. Though, the employers need to be very mindful of how long people can spend in particular countries, where they're paying tax, what different kind of immigration rules apply. And this is where those big corporations will often, have specific departments or engage these type of global mobility consultants to advise on that sort of thing. But research suggests that there are a number of organisations that get themselves into problems when they don't fully understand all the kind of tax implications and so on of people moving around, and we might be seeing that increasingly with these shorter term assignments. So what happens when companies are looking to send employees away on these expatriate type assignments? Well, it's what's known as the Expatriate Cycle. So there's obviously the planning phase, thinking about where we actually need workers to go to. So if we think about 95% of organisations saying to the RES forum that they were sending people abroad to meet an immediate business need, then there's going to be the planning around that. So what is that specific need within a specific country? Who do we then have, who we can send? So that selection phase. And that selection phase involves quite a lot of consideration about what's the package that we're going to offer that particular person to move. And this is where, when we think about assigned expatriates versus self-initiated expatriates, for certain types of roles, those people who are self-initiated expatriates, applying for job roles abroad, often have language skills, and a range of kind of skills that they can offer, and are often a cheaper option than assigning somebody from HQ, and paying them, remunerating them for travelling abroad, potentially with their partners, with their families, if they have them for a period of time. So talked earlier on about how many corporations are looking to drive down the costs of these international assignments. So this kind of selection and package is an important part of the process. Then thinking about what preparation, so should we offer these people training? What do they need? What does that look like? What kind of outcomes does it tend to have? Needs to be thought about. There's a process of adjustment, and historically there's been research that suggested a number of expatriate assignments kind of fail because the worker doesn't really adjust very well, or the worker, if they take their family with them, the family doesn't adjust very well. Some people note that actually if the worker, the employee themselves is perhaps not very happy where they've been sent, and they've taken the family with them, that's a bit of a cop-out option for them to suggest, my family's not actually settling, we need to go home. So sometimes families might be used as a bit of an excuse for failing to adjust. Other times, it might be the case that they really are struggling to adjust, or the worker themselves is struggling to adjust. And then we've got this important period of repatriation at the end of a timed assignment, that person moving back to HQ. And historically, research has suggested that a number of people who've been sent on these expatriate assignments have been lost. There's been an attrition or turnover of those types of people. PwC have conducted some research in last sort of 3 or 4 years, and they suggest that now, it's quite a small amount, maybe about 5% of people who are sent on these assignments, according to their surveys, are being lost when it comes to the time to return home and back to the HQ. They suggest that the reasons those people are lost are particularly important, and a lot of that is about not having a specific job, or a job of the same status necessarily, or the job that they want to go back to. And we're seeing, firms now not necessarily guaranteeing people will be able to come back to the same job or the same kind of status in the way that they once were. So not having the job that they expect or want to move back to. There's also the thing that people are developing, obviously, their experience and their skills, their career capital, while they're away on these assignments, and they may well find other job offers that are more attractive. Some people are poached before the end of their assignments, and they move on, often working for then a competitor to their corporation. So thinking about that kind of repatriation, thinking about those kind of turnover issues is important. Research by some of these big kind of consulting companies suggests that in the majority of multinational enterprises, selection of expatriates for an assignment, there's no formal kind of process that's gone through. It's very much based on the who knows who. A variety of things may be taken into account, things we'd expect, so how adaptable people are, their communication skills, and then things more around personal characteristics and family situation, so gender, age, ethnicity. And this is where we get into, perhaps, or corporations get into more sticky situations, because we know that there have been those historical biases, those kind of assumptions, for instance, that women with families won't want to move, and they've been offered less opportunities perhaps for these types of assignments. Things like sexual orientation has sometimes not been fully understood either, in terms of, what are the cultural and legal aspects in relation to that in different countries, and are the corporations really fully apprised of that and able to support people? Now, it does seem that a lot of big companies are trying to increase the diversity of this global kind of talent pool, so this pool of people that might get sent on these types of assignments, and looking to support that. Many more now take into account different types of family structure, consider the same-sex relationships, for instance. So big corporations are starting to become much more aware of that, and trying to support that. But we've seen from the data that actually it's still really dominated by certain types of people, particularly in those high status assignments. Now, when it comes to preparatory training, that tends to get called CCT, or cross-cultural training, and there are a variety of things that may contain. In some cases, language training may be given. In other cases, it may be that people who can already speak the language very well are the ones who are selected to go. There's a lot of focus on helping people to understand different cultures, where these CCT type programs are organised. So giving them a general cultural orientation, an understanding of the purpose, the benefits and value of the actual assignment, dealing with how to deal with stress, so how to adapt and adjust to working in that country, and how the spouse or partner and family may be able to adjust in the host country. Sometimes it's very kind of specific host country cultural orientation, so there's more general cultural orientation type programs, and then very specific ones. Practical kind of tips and assistance, so this might be about organising school admissions where children are going with an employee, introduction to different social networks, and so on. There are, of course, benefits and potential drawbacks of these cross-cultural training programs. I will let you pause the video and look at these for yourselves. In terms of the goals of cross-cultural training, there are different dimensions of adjustment which cross-cultural training is looking to address. Knowledge, what are known as cognitive goals, so knowledge about the norms and the values and what's accepted behaviour in particular countries, so the host country that someone's moving to, how to manage stress and so on. There are feelings and emotions, that dimension of adjustment, so affective goals in relation to that, which can be things like trying to change perceptions of particular host countries, managing attitudes towards that culture, ways of handling negative emotions, enhancing workers' confidence to be able to interact with local people. And there are behavioural goals as well, which might be, say, related to specific language training if it's given, specific intercultural interpersonal skills, how perhaps interviews are conducted within a particular culture. That can vary. What's the negotiation kind of process? How is that managed within a particular kind of culture? A range of training methods can be used to educate people about the cultural nuances of the host country that they're going to, and differences can be quite small in terms of how people within different cultures greet each other, what way handing over a business card, for instance, is handled. So in some cultures there's more of a ceremony about that. You're expected to kind of receive the business card in both hands and look at the information on it very carefully and put it away very carefully, whereas perhaps in a more American, UK kind of context we might take a business card and say, oh great, thanks very much, and kind of put it in our wallet, put it in our briefcase, whatever. So if we do that in some cultures, then that will not be seen as a sign of respect. So there are a whole host of methods for getting people used to these different kind of cultural nuances. It might be individual, personal type of coaching. Videotapes, case studies have been used, particular kind of workshops and webinars on certain sessions, introduction to others who have been there, and very importantly, orientation visits can be really useful. Now, McNulty and Brewster suggest that in today's world with social media and WhatsApp, some of the need for more formal training is really disappearing, that people can quite easily actually foster their own social networks, get in contact with people through social media before they go to a particular country, set up those discussions with them and maintain that kind of contact, so that's actually starting to really reduce the need for some of this formal training. Historic data suggested that, as I say, expatriates have had difficulties adjusting, and that it's been due to a lack of pre-departure training. So in the 90s, we were seeing 50 to 60% of US companies weren't providing any kind of pre-departure training at all. Late 90s Price Waterhouse survey, so only 13% of European firms that they surveyed said that they always provided expatriates with that kind of cross-cultural training. But as I said previously, McNulty and Brewster in their recent book argue that the evidence about the benefits of such training is quite mixed, it's quite equivocal, and that the results from quite general cross-cultural training programs can be quite limited. But specific country awareness and forging those kind of connections through social media with specific contacts can work much better, and as I say, is reducing some of the need for this type of formal training. Now, McNulty and Brewster and other researchers such as Navas, they're adapting a diagram from Navas' work here, talk about different domains of adjustment or different areas of life really that expatriates need to adjust to. And they're suggesting really that as we kind of work our way down this list, it gets more difficult for people to change their way of thinking and to adjust. So regulatory systems, the laws of the land, which side of the road you drive on, for instance, and those kind of rules, yes, people can kind of get to grips with those quite quickly. In the workplace, some expatriates will be better supported through their HR teams and others, than other expatriate workers are. But again, usually in these big companies, there is that support there to help people understand the way things are operating, perhaps within a subsidiary, the country that they've gone to. There are issues in relation to the economy, so things around banking, shopping, those kind of things, which again may take a little bit of time to get used to, but people can adjust to. And then we come into the more social side of things, the more deeply ingrained attitudes to ways of doing things, ways of interacting. So family relations, can get strained by these type of international assignments, both in the situation where a family stays at home. That puts a lot of stress perhaps on both the employee and the family back home, but also family relations can be strained where we've got dual career couples, let's say, and a partner moves to support the partner who's taking on the international assignment, maybe with or without children, and there can be difficulties around there. Some work's looked at the way that partners actually respond, those that are kind of ready and kind of open to these new experiences and tend to fare better, and the more kind of reluctant partners who accompany a person on an international assignment and perhaps then struggle more to adjust. So that's something to perhaps think about in terms of kind of the link with all of this in relation to careers. So how these international assignments help develop careers, what happens within dual career couples, how is all of this kind of managed, and what role do assignments play in that overall relationship. So family relations, broader kind of social relations, making social contacts in a new country is likely to take time. Again, the workplace might help facilitate that and, introduce executives and their partners to, other executives and their partners and try and kind of enhance that experience. People perhaps at a more mid-status level might not get such support for that. And that can take time when you're in that new culture and you're more isolated from your long-term friends and social relations back home. And then ultimately these established ways of kind of thinking about things, our attitudes, our perceptions that have become embedded over years, our ways of thinking are likely to be slower to adjust and to change. I've spoken already about repatriation, and if we're thinking about benefits of expatriate experience, and it's worth thinking about benefits from both the employee and the employer or corporation side of things. The corporation clearly sees some benefits to sending people abroad in terms of developing their leadership skills. And I said right at the start that it's been an important part of that career development. There's that expectation by some multinationals that all their senior leaders will have had that type of experience. So, there are benefits for businesses in sending people abroad, as well as high costs. We also see from the employee perspective, the worker perspective, that for the vast majority of people who take on these assignments, particularly the high status expatriates, this experience has a positive career effect for them. It adds to what Inkson and Arthur call their career capital. And they say career capital is the development of knowing how, knowing whom, and knowing why. So again, we're going to talk more in the module about careers, but thinking about our careers are a sum of all of our experiences. So when we move from one job to another, we don't start from scratch. Hopefully most people don't. They've acquired some know-how, know why along the way, and they take that, they transfer that to another job. Should we say different jobs, sometimes paid work, sometimes unpaid work, all a part and parcel of what we tend to think of as a career these days. So overall, it's largely beneficial for people to take on these international assignments. It's why we're seeing perhaps people doing more serial international assignments than was once the case. And that can mean that there are those issues around retention of the expats if the organisation isn't able to offer that person what they want when it comes to the end of their assignment. Now, I've already said that we are seeing some changes in terms of international assignments. Since the global financial crash, we've seen multinationals reducing the number of people that they are sending abroad. They're making much greater use of virtual teams and these shorter term assignments. We're seeing emerging markets create new demands for a more global workforce. So we're seeing some companies sending people around the world quite quickly to explore local opportunities or to provide specialised skills. We're seeing the fact that global mobility doesn't necessarily mean this complete relocation in the way that it once did. We're seeing this shorter term kind of commuting and so on. And that it can also mean moving larger groups of workers, almost in squads, around the world for a short period. So that's becoming increasingly common, that we might have a team that are sent as a squad, around a big corporation to different subsidiaries to address specific kind of issues for a short period of time. So we're seeing international assignments really change in flavour somewhat. So to conclude this particular video, for multinational enterprises operating globally, then there are quite complex issues in relation to these international assignments and cultural adjustment. At an organisational level, then organisations need to think about their skills in-house for handling these types of international assignments, and to think about the benefits of pre and post-departure training, and that's something that needs to be regularly monitored. For sure, managers and leaders who have these types of global business skills and the cultural awareness that comes from these types of international assignment are in high demand. But we're also seeing more self-assigned expatriates these days, and that's something that is likely to be highly beneficial for organisations where people have initiated working in a different country and gathered that experience for themselves to generate a more global career. And it's very likely that the look of international assignments and the types of global workers that exist is likely to alter in coming years. Thank you for listening.